Bolton. All in favor?
Aye.
Notice of the special meeting of the Pitman Board of Education was advertised in the South Jersey Times, posted at Borough Hall, a copy thereof delivered to all Pitman schools to be posted, and posted on the district's website. Further notice was posted and filed as required by law, stating that the Board of Education would meet in public session at 7 p.m. in the Pitman High School cafeteria. The president shall entertain any objections with supporting reasons to the conduct of this meeting on the grounds that it violates the Open Public Meeting Act. Seeing none, welcome to the Pitman Board of Education meeting. May I have a moment of silence, please? Please join me in a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Rose, will you please call the roll?
Miller,
Here.
Papalardo, absent. Grossman,
Here.
Higby Iona,
Here.
Bolton,
Here.
Farrell,
Here.
Pope, here. Crispin.
Here.
We are all here but Papalardo.
Thank you. This brings us to our first public hearing. The Pitman Public School Board recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and the importance of allowing members of the public to express themselves on school matters of community interest. This is the first of 2 public comments we'll be having tonight. Typically, the public hearing is on agenda items only. However, due to the nature of this evening's meeting, this public hearing will be open to members of the public for any topic. This is public comment and not a dialogue between the board and the public. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and it is your opportunity to comment or ask questions. In accordance with board policy number 0167, we ask that you state your name, municipality of residence, and group affiliation if applicable. To be recognized to speak, please stand behind the microphone and speak clearly into the microphone. The microphone is located right up here. Seeing no one, we'll go into the president's report. I wanted to take an opportunity to update members of the public on some of the legislative advocacy that the board has been doing in respect to both the pending legislation that will be heard before the assembly tomorrow that will offer the reduction of some of the S2 impact for this year. That should pass the assembly. We're pretty hopeful about that. But there are some kind of further topics that we wanted to discuss. On Monday, I had the opportunity with Councilperson Mazzola to speak to Assemblyman Moriarty and his staff regarding the state funding formula and some of the challenges that the state funding formula has presented to our school district. There were a number of items that we outlined for Assemblyman Moriarty, including that the district has put a plan or proposal for a plan in place to create a very sustainable district in the future, and that we were looking for ways that we could reduce our spending and ensure that we are doing our due diligence to be mindful of the budget and the restrictions that the S2 reductions have put upon us. But in addition to sharing some of those things, one of the factors in the state funding formula that we wanted to bring to Assemblyman Moriarty's attention was the local fair share. So one of the statistics in the formula that I found interesting, our local fair share last year for the state, so what they believe our community should raise in local taxes, was $11,665,247. So that's what they allocated in our state funding formula last year that we should come up with as local taxpayers to contribute towards Pitman Public Schools. This year, the state calculated our local fair share at an increase of 14.5%, bringing our local share up to $13,351,208. In addition to that increase, there's a multiplier that the state comes up with. And part of the problem with using the state funding formula to kind of guess where we're going to land is that they have created a system that is proprietary. They don't have to share their work, so to speak. They don't have to share with us how they arrived at the multipliers that they have chosen to utilize into determining what that local fair share looks like. So the state takes the aggregate value of the properties in town, as well as the income of the district, of the members in the community, and they use multipliers to arrive at a number. They then divide that number by 2 and add those 2 categories up to equal what they believe is an appropriate amount of taxes. The challenge when you see your local fair share go up 14.5% is pretty significant. You want to understand how they arrived at that increase. So when we look at Pitman and we look at the impact of local fair share, it seems to disproportionately impact Southern New Jersey. And part of the reason for that is because a town like Pitman, so I think I looked at the 2018 statistic. In 2018, Pitman had less than 9% of non-residential properties that were not apartments. So when you look at the tax burden and how it disproportionately impacts our property owners, these are some of the factors that kind of layer into this conversation. So in bringing that, and I'm sure it wasn't bringing it to Assemblyman Moriarty's attention, I know he's aware of it, but how the impact is felt in Southern New Jersey, it really creates an opportunity to ensure that districts like ours have an opportunity as the state looks to the funding formula to represent our interests. Because certainly there's always a dynamic within the state as to how they create these formulas and arrive at these numbers, and they're influenced by a number of factors outside of the district's control. But that's where I think legislative advocacy is an opportunity for members of our community to reach out to our local representatives and speak to the challenges that we're facing and what that looks like for our community and what it looks like for surrounding communities like ours. So, we wanted to speak to that, and we wanted to speak to, even if you look at the multiplier, had they used last year's multiplier with this year's numbers, so, our current aggregate value, it would have been nearly a $1 million reduction in what our local fair share would be. So that, it is an important note. How do those multipliers get created? How are they arrived at? And, what are we doing at the state level to address it? We also spoke to the disparity between how they calculate what our special education aid looks like. It's not a representation of the actual students that you have on roll. It's calculated at 15.9% of your student population. So, and additionally, your speech students, students who only need speech are also categorized by a straight percentage. This is the number of kids you have. It's multiplied by this percentage. So we will give you aid for 16 students when in fact you have 60 enrolled in that category of needing assistance. So they're not funding that formula from the perspective that they're not providing you with state aid that it reflects your actual population that's being educated in your school. So we spoke to kind of some of the additional factors that the state has put forth that have increased the burden to school districts and the responsibility and jobs that our district staff do. I mean, I'm sure that the district staff could speak much more eloquently to this, but the number of mandates, both from testing and disciplinary perspectives, have changed. And, the state doesn't always fund the additional responsibilities that they've now tasked our district with. And while we're all in the same boat on that across the board in the state, there's certainly an impact felt like by smaller districts like ours. So we wanted to share all of those things with the assemblymen and make sure that we were having that opportunity to advocate for our district. I spoke this afternoon with Assemblywoman McCarthy Patrick's legislative aide. They were extremely helpful and receptive to the information and indicated that they would be reaching out to the New Jersey State Board of Education to serve as a liaison in setting up an opportunity for me to speak with them. And we heard from Legislative District 3 as Pitman transitions from Senator Durr's office today. And I'll have an opportunity to meet with Senator Durr next week. So I wanted to share that update with members of the community so that you were aware that the Board of Education is pursuing every avenue and looking at this not just for what serves our district next year, but in the future. And that we were doing our due diligence and educating ourselves as to how the funding formula works and where we think there are disproportionate impacts to districts like ours, so that should the opportunity exist to reevaluate that funding formula, we know what areas we really need to advocate in, and we're doing our best to kind of do so. So as we hear more, we'll certainly update members of the public, and we wanted to share that kind of on behalf of the entire board. I will turn it over to Mr. Crispin.
Well, good evening, everyone. I guess speaking to the board right now, we thought it would be a great opportunity for us to maybe get together. It's obviously not a regular board meeting; it's a special board meeting to talk a little bit about these two major topics that we're going to be discussing: the school reconfiguration plan and our budget for next year. We really haven't had a chance to talk about the proposed plan that we've been discussing. We know how quickly all this moved as we had our regular meeting last month and we were working to try to crunch the numbers to kind of see if we were going to be able to present a balanced budget without any significant changes in our configuration of our schools, and we just were not able to do that. So this is what we proposed. It's getting us closer to where we need to be. We're going to be talking about that in a few minutes when we transition to the budget. But our recommendation at that particular time was the consideration of the 2 elementary schools, moving the elementary schools to the middle school's 7th and 8th grade students over to the high school. We've had a lot of public responses relative to that. We've received emails, a few emails relative to that possibility. And there have been other suggestions. And I guess it's just taking a moment of pause. It's not that we need to make a decision tonight, but certainly by the April 19th meeting, we need to make a decision. So an opportunity for us to discuss amongst ourselves what our thoughts might be at this particular time, provide the community and the public an opportunity to continue to weigh in, whether it's tonight at this meeting in response to any of our conversations or before the next meeting, before action is actually taken, so that we have an opportunity to hear kind of where everybody is. I think at this particular point, the only recommendations that I've heard, there's just maybe been a couple. I mean, I think number one, on maybe a couple instances, and I think you've seen those emails, is the possibility of switching the middle school, high school scenarios, meaning high school students would actually go to the middle school. The old high school was something that was recommended. Elementary students would come here to this high school. Possibly the idea that it was one floor might be easier to navigate for elementary age students. I think that was kind of the idea. I think partly in our responses, some of the questions that we would have relative to that possible scenario is this is a highly specialized building. We've been very fortunate to receive the grant, as far as our STEM program is concerned, and we have a major upgrade in our STEM program and our technology programs. Obviously, our science labs, although we have relatively nice science labs at the middle school, are highly specific to our programs here, as well as one end of the building for performing arts, other end of the building for athletics, more suited to a high school population. But I guess just to make sure that everything is discussed and it's considered, kind of putting that out there on the table, for consideration. At one day, obviously it did serve as a high school, but days and times have changed, and certainly our needs potentially have changed also. So I think that's been one that's presented, and of course, the board's going to have to consider. I think there are some people that still feel that there maybe needs to be consideration as far as the high school students going to another school district, whether that's this year or sometime in the future. But that's also something that I know is always on the table. I think the position that we have taken at some of the meetings is, right now it's not something that we're considering, but, after we go through the budget tonight, that may change. So I think those are really the only thoughts. Obviously, if anybody here and from the community has any other thoughts, amongst the board, I guess now is the time that we can have those conversations. So I guess, in terms of the recommendation, kind of where we are, if anybody wants to kind of weigh in and just kind of, pros and cons, the areas, things we struggle with, kind of where we are as a board, probably would just give us a sense of where we are and also give the community a sense of kind of what's being considered. Anybody with some strong opinions?
I think the board has engaged in, quite a few conversations and with members of the community and in committees about some of the challenges in the transition. I think we recognize that there are a number of students that have seen quite a few transitions in their short time frame within our school district and in life, frankly. And I think change is always difficult. And I think that the board really feels the loss of what we had, but we recognize that in creating a sustainable path forward, this is probably an option that allows us to best serve what we feel like is the whole community. So I think we just want to make sure that we are being responsive to members of the community and their concerns as it pertains to the transition and some of the challenges as we transition different populations into different buildings and across different boundaries within the community and what that looks like. So I think there's a lot of confidence that you will certainly make sure that we have the best possible plan in place so that on September 7th of 2023, students pre-K through 12 are being educated in Pitman and to the best of our capabilities, and We feel confident that our administrators and staff will continue to do the exceptional job that they have always done, regardless of how limited the resources they've been provided. And we, I think, have all the confidence that, that they will continue to deliver an exceptional education to Pitman students.
All share the heartbreak that this plan is imposing on the community. We all have children of various ages in the schools, or most of us do, who will also be affected by this plan, but it really does give us the best opportunity to provide the best education and to maintain our small district, which is one of the things that's always been very special about living in Pitman.
Just to add a few more layers to this, as many of the members in the community that are here tonight, and you're probably maybe participating, we are going through the process of strategic planning right now, which has provided us an opportunity to have more extensive conversations about a lot of these issues. And it's also provided us the opportunity to have most recently a survey that was sent out. And it's kind of interesting that these two things kind of happen simultaneously. And I'm not sure if hopefully people didn't read into that. I mean, we started down this track of strategic planning, not knowing where we would be right here tonight. We started with meetings with grade level configuration, not knowing where we'd be tonight, high school sustainability. And again, we've had to turn quickly. But in some of the information that we received from the survey, I mean, I know there's a lot of concerns relative to the middle school. It was expressed throughout the survey. We look forward to the opportunity where we can allow people to actually walk through the building, parents coming through the building, getting an opportunity to see where their children will be going. We try to emphasize that it is a good building. I know there's people that maybe don't feel that way, but relatively speaking, of the three older buildings, it's on par with either of the two elementary schools in terms of how it's been maintained. Are there areas in which we hopefully would like to improve upon? I think there are. One that comes through, again, through the survey is HVAC, and that's something that we're taking a look at now. We're taking a look at now through the strategic planning process. We anticipate that every room will have the same level of air conditioning that Memorial School has, and Kindle has, and Walls has, come September 7th of next year. We were planning on doing that anyway. Our plan was that we were going to make sure that all the classrooms, especially the third floor this spring, was going to have window units in each one of those classrooms. We're now kind of pausing that a little bit, only because we don't want to have to go out and buy the units if we're potentially getting units from the other two schools. So we're going to do the very best can. We're going to take every unit that we have to try to get them up there now in preparation for the spring. But the plan will be that every room will have at least what we have right now in the way of window units. And we have a group that's a facilities planning group that's part of the strategic planning process that will be looking at a potential referendum. And again, we welcome anyone to provide input in terms of what are those priorities going to be at each of the three schools. And certainly, probably being at the oldest school, obviously, the middle school is going to have some significant needs. Maybe the opportunity to have a centralized air conditioning, an HVAC system will be certainly very nice. That might be something that might be prioritized just based on the survey. It seems like it might be for the bond referendum. As well as some of the other maybe aesthetics or maybe more functional things, windows and doors and security and things of that nature, as well as hopefully being able to address high school if there's any significant needs here, as well as Memorial, which also does not have a centralized system. So again, we're doing the best we can with what we have. It wasn't the plan. Our plan was hopefully to be able to have a bond referendum that was going to put us in a place where we could make the transition, whatever the decision was, into buildings that have already been renovated. Now we're going to do a little bit of catch up. But given what we have to work with, I consider that we have some level of fortune that we have a building that can accommodate all the grade levels, all the supports that are necessary. There's going to be enhancements in terms of having an all-purpose room gymnasium that's a little bit bigger than what we've had before. We're going to have some challenges in terms of playgrounds and logistics of dropping off and picking up and those things, but nothing that I don't think we'll have any difficulty working through. That's kind of where we are. So it's an opportunity when we get to the second public session for anyone else that would like to offer any of their thoughts or comments, or those members of the community who might be watching or not able to be here tonight. No decisions being made tonight. The decision will probably be made at the April 19th meeting so that we know what the plan is to move forward, and there'll be opportunities for public comment also at that time. Good? All right. So really the reason we wanted to come here tonight, I especially wanted to have an opportunity to meet with the board and certainly provide information to the community, is about the budget. We normally wait until the public hearing, which is on the 19th, really to kind of dig into the details. That is a public hearing on the budget, and we'll take some time to kind of go through, but it's not really to any depth, but it gives everyone, the board and the community, an opportunity to kind of get a bigger picture of kind of where we stand. But we wanted to take some time tonight to bring everybody up to speed in terms of where we are currently. It is a process. We are not at the end. We're probably somewhere in the middle, to be very honest with you, which is not great news, to be very, very honest with you. We still have a ways to go, and I'm going to highlight some of those things as we go through this tonight. I'm going to try to keep it at a very surface level. There's so many ways in which we could dig into this, but I think the document that I have shared here with the board and with the community, I think I have always found to be the easiest. It is the state program. So what you're seeing is what the board's going to approve and what we submit to the state. This information has already been submitted to the county office. They're in the process of reviewing this. Once they approve it, then we can advertise our budget, and then the board can take action on the budget at the April 19th meeting. What I've given you tonight is a very simplistic summary of the budget. I think it's the simplest form. And certainly if people have more detailed questions, we're more than willing to entertain them. But I'm going to try to hit on what I feel are the key elements of this budget and where we stand relative to those key elements. So I'm just going to take you through very quickly. If I had I'm going to stand up for a second. If I had my blackboard behind me or my whiteboard behind me, I would probably draw a line across the top and a line right down the middle. And on the left side, I would put revenues. And on the right side, I would put appropriations. Those are the two sides of the budget you have. You have advertised revenues. That's a one page. And if you flip over, second page is advertised appropriations. Appropriations is a very fancy word for expenditures. That's basically, the budget process is a relatively simple process. And even the budget document that you have in front of you is a relatively simple document. So there's two sides of the budget. There's a revenue side of a budget, and that's all the money that's coming into the district. And then there's the appropriations or expenditure side of the budget, is how we're going to spend those revenues. And the bottom line here is those two sides have to equal each other. I highlighted that. If you go back on the second page of the advertised appropriations, which is on the back, and look for the number 5. The number is $5,876,639. And if you look to the left, I think I circled that also, regular programs for instruction. All right. And then what I would like you to do is I'd like you to drop down to the bottom number at the bottom. Let me just take a look at that real quick. I'm doing too good here. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm going to come back to that one in a second. So I'm going to come back to number 5. Again, I need you to go to the last page. I gave you the wrong number. It would be number 1. So my wrong side. I want to start with number 1. I'm going to go in order. So number 1 is the general fund grand total. This is basically the total of our operating budget, what it takes to run our schools. $23,798,550,000. All right. You can see that's gone down significantly from our budget from last year of the $25,918,804. And the first column is actual. That's an audited number. That's what we actually spent. That's not a budgetary number. That's what was actually spent during the 21-22 school year. The budget was probably much higher than that, a couple $100,000, and there's probably monies left over. So you can see the difference between the years. So that's number 1. That's our total operating budget. Everything that comes after that, are specialized funds, monies that have to be used for designated purposes. So as you go down there, you see the words Title I, Title II, IDEA, all kind of letters and acronyms. They're all monies we get from the state. Those are all monies we get actually from the federal government for very specific purposes. And you can see it's not really that much. There really isn't that much there. Everything, for the most part, as far as our operations are concerned, are in that number that I just shared with you. Now, that number has to tie into a number over on the revenue side. I just want to tie those two things together so we all see. Hopefully I get it right. And then you find number 2 over on the revenues at the bottom, total operating budget, $23,798,550,000. So when we say we have to present a balanced budget, expenditures, and that's what we're working towards. All right. So we go back to expenditures. We have a process that we go through. All of our budget administrators, all of our administrators who are budget managers, meet with their teachers or with their staff or whatever process they want to go through. And they basically get the things that they're looking to request. They build them into their individual budgets. And then we meet with each one of those individuals. We review that information. We sign off on it. We make reductions. We fine tune it. We make sure everything's kind of jives. And then all that comes together in those line items that you see summarized there on the advertised appropriations. Again, this is summarized. There's a lot of details that are contained in each one of those different areas, but you can see all the different areas, starting with that number 5 that I talked about before. I'm going to come back to that. Regular programs, instruction, special ed, basic skills, bilingual, school-sponsored co-curricular, athletics, instruction, health, speech. You see it. Pretty much gives you an idea of just, it is every area of operation in this district are summarized on that page. When this is approved by the board and it's going to be, and it's kind of made public, you could potentially, if you desired, get a document that's much more detailed than this. And it'll give me a more clearer picture of how all those monies are being allocated. And we'll be looking to share some of that information when we have the public hearing. All right, so that's our appropriation side of the budget, and the two have to equal. Now, the way things work is when we get done meeting with our budget administrators, we have a total operating budget that's kind of been requested. All right, it's been requested. Then we have to work on our revenue side. And as you can see, looking at the advertised revenues, our number one revenue resource is the local tax levy. That's at the top. That local tax levy can only increase by 2%. There are a couple exceptions to that rule, and that may be something the board will be discussing. They're very minor exceptions where they can exceed the 2%. But I think if you look at those numbers from 21-22, the 14,892 to the 15,190 to the 15,493, that's a 2% increase in each one of those numbers. So that's what we call the budget cap. We cannot increase the tax levy by more than 2%, except for very few exceptions. So if people say, well, you know, we're going to lose a program and the taxpayers don't want to lose that program, or they don't want to lose all these staff, and they'll say, well, we'll pay more for it. That's not something that we can do through this process. It's something the board could consider. You know, you could put a question on the ballot for next November. We can discuss that if that's something the board wants to discuss. We would not have those positions next year because it's not getting approved till November. It really doesn't become available to you till after that. So it's a little bit complicated. That can be discussed at the public hearing, but there's nothing we can do about that right now. So we're kind of locked into just that 2%. We've all been, if you've been at our meetings before, if you've not, I'll just reemphasize it. Drop down to equalization aid. That's our primary source of aid from the state. You can see the impact that we've had over the last 3 years, going from the 6.8 million to the 5.7 to the 4.2. Just between last year and this year, almost a $1.5 million decrease. That's why we're dealing with what we're dealing with here today. It's been significant. We're going through a phase of reduction. It's called S2. We've commented on a number of our different meetings. We're in this next year will be year 5 of 6 years. As April indicated in her conversations with some of our state leaders, it's a very complicated calculation that they're using to make this determination. And maybe there's some hope that maybe that can be changed in some regard to not hurt us as much as it's hurting us, and maybe some other factors can be considered. So that's number 1. You can see our total from the state. You can see that at the bottom. That's number 4. Pretty much the same difference. It's about that. It's a little bit more than that. Looking at here, it's equalization aid is the biggest factor as far as that number is concerned. Not many differences other than that. There was the $70,000 in reimbursements that we received. So you can see the numbers and the decrease that we've experienced there. I'm going to come back to the budgeted fund balance in a few minutes, but again, the bottom line is they have to equal. And what the document you have in front of you, those two things are equal. And I want to close this part by just saying the budgetary process is a revenue-driven process. I know there's a lot of people, that are going to talk about all the things potentially that we could be looking to reduce and wanting the board to reconsider. All that is great. But if we do not have the revenue to support it, it's very difficult to reconsider. Certainly there's reallocation, and that's something that obviously we will be looking at. Reallocation meaning, taking monies from over here and reducing in this area to bring over to this area. But there's certainly a balance, and we have to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all the students in this district. But it is a revenue driven. So where we were when we got done this first part of the budgetary process, when we finally got our state aid numbers, we knew the revenue side of our budget, and it is what you have in front of you right now at $23,798,000 change. We knew that. Problem was, on the other side, when we completed this process, the number that we had under the appropriations was about $2.5 million more than what you see on that bottom line of $23,798,550. About $2.5 million more. Right? Part of that reason is because we lost $1.5 million in state aid. That was part of it. I would say that's the biggest part of it. The next part was last year, in order to balance the budget, we took advantage of some one-time revenue sources in the amount of about $900,000. About $500,000 from federal monies that we would receive as a one-time source. There were 5 positions that were funded out of these ESSER monies. You can see those letters on there on the revenue side. So we took about $500,000 there. And we took about $400,000 from what I call our savings account, our unbudgeted fund balance. Again, it's a one-time. It's great that you can take money out of savings and you can use it to help support your budget. But if that money is no longer there, you've now created a problem. You have a hole in your budget that you can't fill on the revenue side, and then you have to reduce it. It's kind of where we are right now. So that was 1.5 plus about 900. And then the rest of the kind of the deficit in terms of the difference between the 23 million we have in revenues and the 25 we had at the time in the appropriations was just overall other increases. Everything in the budget, the main part of the budget, not everything, salaries and benefits make up most of our budget. Probably around 85% of our budget is salary and benefits. Well, salaries growing up by more than 2%. That cap, remember that cap was on a very small number. Our salaries are 85% of 23 million roughly, and they're going up by more than 2% in benefits. We're talking 8 or 9% for 9% for next year. Big part of our budget. So that's going up more than what we're getting on the revenue side, which also then created, it's part of that 2.5. So we started at 2.5, and last time we reported, we've gone through a process in which we've started to identify possible reductions. And I use the word possible. You know, everything is tentative until we get to a final point where this is where we need to go. And that was worth about $1.2 million. And that's what I've expressed before. It's about 24 positions that we have identified with the closing of the 2 schools. And it was the reason that we felt, because it was such a large number, you know, the first thing we looked at, of course, was what does one school do for us? You know, everybody asked, well, let's just move the middle school to the high school and leave the 2 elementaries. And we looked at that, and it just does not provide us the savings that we needed to offset this difference of $2.5 million. So then we had to look at the 2 schools, the impact that that would have. You know, we've gone through and identified the positions, you know, the 2 of everything in each building. We have 2 administration, you know, we have, you know, 2 nurses and 2 guidance and custodians and support staff and those elements at the 2 schools, you know, as well as looking at some other areas. And that's where we are right now with the $1.2 million reduction and the 24 staff members. I'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. So that's still leaving us roughly, I'm rounding here, about 1.2 and change still left that needs to be reduced. Now, the reason you don't see that here, and this is where I need to come back to number 5 on the appropriation side. The reason you don't see the difference is because we had to submit a balanced budget to the county for their review. We didn't have a choice. So the number that you're seeing there in that line of $5,876,000, that's here. That number, the $5,876,000, is actually, it's 429. I added them up somewhere. Times 2, right? Times 2, right? What is that? Want to do that for me real quick? I'll make sure I give them the right number. Oh, I had it here. Yep, 858. I had it written down. All right, so back to that. So we're looking at number 5, that 5,876. Before we sent this to the county, we were 800. That number was $858,000 more than what you see right there. So if we took 5,876,639 and added 858 to it. No, it's added, right? $6,734,639. That's what it was. And of course, that put us out of balance. We could not submit that to the county for their review. So in order for us to be able to present a balanced budget, we arbitrarily just took that number, the $858,000, from that number to get it to balance, which in essence means we still need to find what represents that $858,000. Could we just go along with it, not do anything? We could. And at the end of next year, we're gonna be in the hole, and we can't be there. So we need to make sure the balanced budget represents reality. This budget right now does not represent reality because we have not identified how we're going to save that $858,000. So that's where we are today. We're still working through that process. There were some very difficult decisions that we had to make to get to where we are right now with 24 positions. Very, very difficult. And as I stand before you right now, I'm going to be very honest. I don't know where we're going to go to find the 858. But we'll work through it. We'll see what happens, and hopefully we'll have a recommendation. We will have a plan when we get to the public hearing of what that might look like. So that's one part of where we are today. The second thing that I want to bring to the board's attention as far as this budget as it stands right now is another key piece. So going back to the revenue side of the budget, And this is number 6. I mentioned to you before, this would be our savings account that I referenced previously. Budgeted fund balance. This is monies that are generally left over. You can never spend an entire budget. So all those monies add together and they accumulate, and you end up with some monies left over. And you can see that right now we're using in the proposed 23-24 budget $961,150 of savings to balance the budget. From our perspective, Chris and I's perspective, that's too much. We would like to, we feel we need to reduce that number because it doesn't represent maybe closer to around 500,000. A district of a $23 to $24 million budget, you could probably generate that each and every year. We are only allowed to maintain 2% of our budgeted fund balance. We're only allowed to maintain 2%, so 2% of $23,460,000. It's not a lot of money. So we're a little concerned with that number. So if we need to reduce that number, let's say by $461,000, the only way to reduce that number by $461,000 is to reduce our appropriations expenditures by that same amount to stay in balance, $461,000. 461,000 put together with 800,000, we're looking at $1.3 million that would have to be reduced and taken away from the appropriation side, the expenditure side of the budget, to keep it in balance with the revenues. So that goes back to the 2.5. Remember I told you we were 2.5 million over. That's where we've been from day one. We've been able to get down, 1.2 and change, and it's still leaving us pretty much an equal amount in order to get to where we really truly need to be. So that's another thing that we will be looking at very carefully, that budgeted fund balance. At the end of the day, we may say that we got to roll the dice. We can't go any further than where we are. We're concerned that if we roll the dice on that budgeted fund balance number, we're not going to have it next year, and we're going to be right back here having to cut even more in order to get the budget balanced because we didn't kind of fix this when we had an opportunity to fix it. But we need to have either the positions or the things on the expenditure side to reduce in order to be able to get that number to be lower. So to the board, that's kind of where we are right now. We have some work still cut out for us, some decisions to make, and more to come. I'll start with the board as far as, yeah.
73,000 from S3732.
No, it doesn't. So let's talk about that. So not approved, as I know, it's up for vote right tomorrow. So it's up for vote tomorrow. So that's obviously something that we're aware of. Let's make sure we understand what that is. That's a one-time funding source. As a one-time funding source, we got to be very careful. It's a Band-Aid, and it's a good Band-Aid. It's a nice amount of money. And it could help us maybe in the transition, maybe soften some of the blows, so to speak. But that money is not going to fix what we're dealing with. We need to get to a balanced budget first, and then ask the question, how can we best utilize these monies to help soften maybe what we just did? So I'll use a hypothetical. Let's say that part of the reduction was a reduction in the number of elementary teachers in a specific grade. And that's going to make that grade level have a class size that's a little uncomfortable for us. But it's what we had to do in order to get a balanced budget. Well, then we come back to that money and we say, now let's take that money and let's put it toward another position at that grade level, because right behind that grade level is a smaller class. That if we can just get one more year, when that smaller class comes up, they may not need all the teachers that are there. And if we lose that teacher at that point, it's not going to hurt us as much as it's hurting us now. Another potential for transitions is going to be what other areas of support we may want to provide. Areas of support would be guidance. It's certainly going to be very important in this transition, especially for an elementary level. We talk about elementary students who have made multiple transitions. We talk about, 7th, 8th graders coming to the high school as quickly as we're doing this. So, that may be an area. But in terms of fixing the problem, it really does nothing, zero, for fixing our budget problem. We need, now if that money had been put into our state aid that we now knew we could get each and every year, that's different. And I think that's kind of where we want to go with these lobbying efforts. We don't want the one time, it's nice, but we need the money in our state aid. We need to know we can count on it each and every year. It's a great question. All right. That's it. That's kind of where we are. And but we'll keep you posted. We'll be working with the Finance Committee as we work through this process. Hopefully it all comes together. Obviously, the funding would be a big help. A Band-Aid for another year. We can see how the Band-Aids work. We're paying the price a little bit for some Band-Aids that we've used in the past, but I've said this before. I would have done the same thing. We all would have done the same thing. It's live to see another year, and then when we get to that year, then we'll hopefully maybe work it out and see what we have to do. But we'll keep you posted. All right.
Second public hearing. This is the second public comment. Please state your name, municipality of residence, and group affiliation if applicable, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Please step up to the microphone in order to participate in public comment.
Dave, 101 Colonial. Couple of questions on the undistributed expenditures instruction tuition from 1.08 to 1.5. What is that?
Out of district, correct?
So we're anticipating a big increase in.
Yeah, one of the things we looked at this year, and we weigh every year, is when does it become more cost effective to maintain students in district or send them out? We're not a big district, but we're not a small district, and we're just at that point where the number of students potentially with any one particular classification that we potentially could provide a class for more economically than sending them out, we just don't have the numbers. And special ed out of district, yes. And we're receiving students here that we just cannot meet their needs. As much as we like to be able to develop a program, there's a significant cost. There's a lot of supports. It's teachers, it's aides, it's other specialized supports. And those numbers are increasing, as you can see, significantly.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak? Sure.
I don't know how any of it works, but do we have an idea of the percentage of staff members that are close to retirement and
Sorry, can you just go on record with your name?
oh, sorry, Sarah Wang.
Thanks, sorry.
And like, how does, I know in like corporations, you can buy someone out like the last couple of years of their retirement. I don't know how any of that works, but is there a possibility of any of that here to kind of like bring in newer people and allow people to retire?
Yeah. Unfortunately, no. We obviously have a pension system, and the pension system does not look favorably on buyouts because of the impact it has on the pension system. So there are very limited opportunities for us to be looking as that as a means. The other thing is, there is a little bit of breakage, between somebody who might be leaving and somebody who would still be overseeing that position. There's still some things that we pay out upon retirements that kind of reduce that breakage a little bit. So there is a little bit of a savings there, but if the position is going to be maintained, it's all good. But unfortunately, no, the buyout is not an option.
Would anyone else like the opportunity for public comment? Okay. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Nope.
Nope. Oh, I
Executive session.
apologize. Yeah, we're going into executive. So the Pitman Board of Education will enter executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel. May I have a motion to go into executive? Second? All in favor? I will add also that we will not be taking action when we return
That's all for this meeting.
at all.
No action.
Thank you.